King's Cross is a church committed to fully enjoy and share with others the life, grace, and restoration that can only be found in Jesus. If you are unable to visit us on Sunday mornings, you can learn more about King's Cross at kingscrossva.org.
Our scripture reading today comes from Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30, and can be found on page 8 of your worship guide. For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servant and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, and to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time the master of those servants came and settled the accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also who had the 2 talents came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also who had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gathered where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is the word of the Lord.
Well, thank you again for being here this morning. My name is John, and we're making our way through a sermon, aren't we? Jesus, he preaches this sermon in his last week in ministry on earth. I wonder if, as you were hearing Britton read this passage, I wonder if you imagined how many complicated, difficult realities are a part of this sermon that Jesus is preaching. You know, so far in this sermon of Jesus, as we've looked at 60 verses, he's seemed to have gone on and on and on. And there's a lot of difficult things in Jesus' sermon, hard to understand. False Christ, desecration of the temple, Jesus' admonition to endure to the end, and then the Son of Man who will come in a cloud. There's a reference to Noah, and Jesus most assuredly says that no one will know when the second coming is. Just a lot of information that is very difficult to understand. As I've been thinking about this sermon, I've wondered if at the end of the sermon, would we expect one of the disciples or maybe a few of the disciples to gather together and come to Jesus and say, Jesus, I have so many questions, I don't even know where to begin. Or we have so many questions, we don't even know where to begin. Or if there might be a crowd of disciples who gather together after Jesus finishes preaching the sermon, and rather than bringing that response to the sermon, they come up to Jesus and they say, Jesus, I understand very little of what you said, just tell me what to do. I think of those who listen to political speeches. Do you often think, okay, I've listened to you for now an hour, I don't even know where to begin to share all of the ways in which I disagree with what you've just said. Have you felt that recently? Or have you heard a long talk from someone like a doctor who's telling you what is wrong with your body, and it's very wrong indeed? And at the end of that conversation, you want to be able to say to the doctor, I don't understand exactly what you said to me. Would you please just tell me what to do? I've thought a lot about these comments. I mean, you need to think about these as well. At the end of the sermon, Jesus, there's so many things I have to ask, I don't even know where to begin. Or, Jesus, I don't know everything that you've said. Would you please just tell me what to do? And this morning, I want you to think with that second response in the back of your mind. I want you to imagine, okay, Jesus, there's a lot of things going on here, but would you please just tell me what to do? And if you come to this part of Jesus' sermon with that frame of reference, I think it'll be more helpful, because what I believe this sermon is teaching us is that a disciple lives their whole lives for the sake of Jesus. That's really what Jesus wants us to understand, that a disciple of his lives their entire lives for the sake of Jesus. That's what Jesus is saying. And I want to show this to you by describing a few things in the passage, and I framed them as questions. The first question is this: what's the big picture? You know, that's so important for a parable. What's the big picture? And we'll do a close reading of those first two verses, 14 and 15. But then the next question we want to ask is not what's the point, but what's not the point. There's a part of this parable where Jesus is tempting us to see that this is the point, but it's actually what's not the point. And then finally, I want to ask this question: what's at stake? So what's the big picture? What's not the point? And then what's at stake? Just look at verses 14 and 15 with me, would you? Jesus, as he tells this parable, he wants to frame our minds with regards to the details of the parable that really and truly matter. The setting of a parable is very important. And the first thing Jesus says is he says that there's this wealthy owner, and the owner has 3 servants. But what Jesus wants the disciples to be aware of is that the return of this owner, it's private. The return of the owner is private. He's going to go on a long trip, and you see in verse 14, it's called a long journey. Verse 15, he went away. But if you jump down on the passage, verse 19 says that after a long time he returns. He's going for a long time. An important part of understanding the big picture of this parable is understanding that the return of this owner is private. The servants are not told when the owner will return. It's almost as if the owner has several houses and leaves one house and goes to another house, leaves another house, and then goes to a separate house. I don't know if anyone here knows someone who has 6 or 7 houses, or maybe you have 6 or 7 houses. You come and go as you please. And the owner seems to be saying that to the disciples as part of the big picture of this parable. The return of the owner is private. And it's interesting that in this sermon so far, Jesus has not said explicitly that he'll go away. Have you noticed that? In the sermon, Jesus has not said explicitly they'll go away, but over and over again he said that I will come back, that there's a second coming. But he's actually been quite hazy, non-existent on his departure. If you want to jump forward and look at the very end of the sermon, you see that's the first thing Jesus does. 2 days, I'm going to be crucified. You notice right after the sermon, Jesus says that. But up to this point, he's not said that he will go away, only that he will come again. And that's very important. You see, that's part of the big picture. The return is private. It will happen, but it's private. And the second part of the big picture is that the expectations of this owner, they're pretty understood, aren't they? There isn't a big debate over what exactly the expectations of the owner are. This is not a house that the owner is leaving, but it's actually a property. You see that in the passage. It's property. He doesn't just walk away as a wealthy person would walk away from a summer home, covering the furniture with blankets. The servants, they understand. There's stuff that needs to be done. You notice that word entrusted at the beginning of the parable? You see that owner, he actually expects something to happen. He expects the property to be worked just as if he was there in person. And the servants, no one complains or gripes about this. It just is understood. The master, he puts his possessions in their care, and they know that they need to do something. And notice also in verse 15 that the master, the owner, he's not called a master yet, that the owner, he gives each according to his ability. And what that means is the owner has a purpose, an expectation. The owner is not just saying, break up the tasks as you see fit. He expects the property to be worked just as if he were present. He entrusts the servants, and he makes sure each of the servants have what's necessary. But the expectations are understood. So his return is private, and his expectations are understood. Let's talk a little bit more about how he equips them. This owner, in case you haven't noticed, and you may not have noticed, is astoundingly wealthy. He's over the top wealthy. You see in verse 15, again, this is apportioning that which the servant has in their own ability, each according to his own ability. But that's described to us in verse 15, and the numbers are remarkable. He apportions 5 talents to one employee, 2 talents to another employee, and 1 talent to the third. And one of the things that really aggravates me about how this parable is translated. Almost every translator gets it wrong. I'm the only one on the planet who gets it right. So surely I must be right and they're wrong. The word talent is pretty hard in English because we can't hear the word talent without thinking of some kind of human ability. Isn't that how we hear the word talent? That's not how the word shows up in the Greek at all. And the disciples, they certainly would not have heard that this is a kind of human ability. What they would have heard was money. Because that's what a talent is. A talent is a talenton. It's a unit of money. Now, it's an astronomically large unit of money. I mean, it is a royal-sized amount of money, but it's an amount of money a disciple would never just automatically jump to, it's some kind of human gift or ability. None of the disciples said that. Well, so how much money? Actually, if you jump down to verse 18, we get a hint that it's an amount of money that's in silver. The word for money in verse 18 is in Greek the word for silver. But it's a large amount of money. How large is the amount of money? A talent, and many of you have a study Bible will say that a talent is equal to, 20 years' salary? Is that what the notes in your Bible say? It's a huge amount of money. You know, in the United States for a time, there was a $10,000 bill, $5,000 bill. I mean, they don't exist. The mint doesn't produce currency like that now. In fact, in the 1930s, it used to be a $100,000 bill. But you need to imagine that a talent is a lot like a $1.2 million dollar bill. Is that what you would call that? A piece of currency that's worth $1.2 million. That's one talent. And the disciples, they would have understood this. Anyone in the first century would have understood this. It's 20 years of wages. It's almost a lifetime of salary for a family. One talent. Let me just think about that for a moment. In the first century, any farm that had, let's say, 20 employees, right? This talent is enough for the annual salary for 20 employees. Any farm that had 20 employees would be extraordinary. Just like not many of us or any of us know someone who has 6 or 7 houses, the disciples, they wouldn't know someone who runs a farm with 20 employees. It's really absurd. In fact, if we want to talk a little bit about this amount, but 1 talent, if that's enough for 20 salaries, is $1.2 million. Imagine 2 talents. Five talents is $6 million, the salary of 100 employees. No one would know of someone who had 100 employees. This is far wealthier than any Roman senator. Astounding volume of money. And yet the owner has the ability to distribute $10 million. And we just so quickly turn talents into some kind of skill or ability. You see, what we're doing is setting the big picture, and the big picture is this, is that the equipping that the owner provides is sufficient. Do you hear that? The equipping is sufficient. So his return is private, the expectations are well understood, and the equipping is sufficient. That's what we need to understand about this parable. Now, verses 14 and 15, that's all we're looking at right now. Those 2 verses, in a sense, tell the disciples so little, but they tell the disciples exactly what they need. One day, this owner is going to leave, and this owner is not going to tell his servants when he returns. And this owner, while he's gone, he expects things to run just as normal. That's his expectation. And he has given each of the employees of his exactly what they need, more than sufficient, in order to meet his expectations. Now, really what he's saying is do today exactly what you did yesterday, and do tomorrow exactly what you did yesterday, and do the next day exactly like you did yesterday. Whatever you did when I was boss around you, do when I'm boss away from you. Okay, so 2 verses, and we begin to understand what exactly Jesus is after in this parable, but we're not given certain details. We're not given the quality of the servants. And we're not given an exact job description of what those servants ought to do. We're not told when exactly the owner is going to return. And I want to argue with you that not knowing those details is actually painful for us. It's painful for me. You know, on a long trip as a kid, it's stereotypical, isn't it? There's always some kid in the family who keeps asking, when are we going to get there? When are we going to get there? When are we going to get there? And you know, maybe you were the dutiful kid, you weren't that kid, because that kid's super annoying. But we all know exactly what that is. We know that heart twang that is always saying, when are we going to get there? When are we going to get there? We want to know what's going on. Sometimes our fear is nothing more than not knowing the details. And I want the details. Sometimes our worry is just not knowing what's happening. And sometimes our anxiety is just not knowing what's going to happen. And sometimes our desire to control things, it gets entirely upset simply because we just don't know all the details. This is actually a problem for the disciples. Yet again, as Jesus opens this parable, he's telling a parable about servants who are not given all of the details. Yeah, they get some things. The expectation is understood, and they're equipped. But they don't know when the boss is going to return, and they're not giving any details about what to do on a day-to-day basis. And now we get the big picture of the parable. Because into that fray of not knowing, being right on the edge of worry, our desire to control is so frustrated because we can't control things. Right at that point, Jesus shares actually what's not the point of the parable. Verses 16 through 18. I want you to just notice how quickly this goes. We've just looked at 2 verses so far. Now we're looking at 16 through 18. The 2 verses put the big picture right in front of us. And verse 16 says that the one who got 5 talents, he made another 5 talents. 6 million became 12 million. And it sounds like a lot, but to be honest, this servant started with a lot. The ESV says only this in verse 16, that this servant traded with the money. You know, honestly, in the Greek, the word traded is not in verse 16. It's just the word work. Worked the money. Put to use that which the owner gave to him. And verse 17, the one who had 2 talents, about $2.5 million, made another $2.5 million. 5 million. We're told actually even less with regards to what this servant did in order to double the money. Maybe traded, who knows? And then again, real quickly, the servant in verse 18, the one who only had the 1 talent, which again is a $1.2 million. But the one who had 1 talent dug into the ground and hid his master's money, verse 18 says. In verse 18 really is the lengthiest description among these 3 servants. And then here in verse 18 is the first time the word master is used. It's the lengthiest description, the first time the word master is used. There's something here about this 3rd servant that we're supposed to notice. But I want us all to agree that, you know, if anyone is going to make a mistake, it's going to be the 3rd servant. Because we know that the owner from the first 2 verses provides the finances according to the abilities, and whoever has the lowest amount of money is the one who, in the estimation of the owner, has the least abilities. There's a real sense verse 18 is really not a surprise. We just kind of expect this. Automatically we know that his ability is less. But here's what's not the point. You see, when we look at verses 17 and 18, we need to understand that we're actually missing a lot of details. In verse 19, the owner's back. But in verses 17 through 18, I want you to notice everything that we're missing. I mean, we don't know enough. We don't know what exactly these servants did. So in order to apply based upon 17 and 18 to our own lives, well, we don't know what these servants did. Is this passage telling us that we all need to, look for a handout of a large chunk of cash and then invest it through international trade? Is that the application? You know, so often we look at a passage like this and we cannot help but see that word talent and apply it as we see fit. Let me give you an example. I give you tons. Someone who spends their life in the business world, maybe a business consultant, might look at verses 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 and go, I get it. Yeah, this is exactly how my line of work of business consultancy works. I go and I sit down with someone and I say, look, don't do nothing like that 3rd servant. Nah, do something. Use your wealth in order to make more wealth. It's right here in the Bible. A parent could apply this by saying, look, son, daughter, don't do nothing like that 3rd servant. Be more like the 1 or 2 you pick. Be like that servant and take the abilities and skills that you have and put them to good use. A business consultant, a parent, a friend. We tell our friends this, don't we? We sit down with a friend and we say, look, I would encourage you not to just do nothing. I see this in you and this in you and this in you. You're great at all these things. Pursue those things. A child to an elderly parent. It's painful to watch our parents who don't seem to be doing a lot and feel as though they can't do anything. And what do? We say, well, wait a minute. You have this ability, this ability, this ability. Multiply. Go do those things, the things that you are physically able to do. None of this is bad advice. It's just not the advice of the passage. It's not the point of the passage. That's not what this passage is here to tell us. And the way that we know that that's not what this passage is here to tell us is because verses 19 and forward. Jesus doesn't end the parable right here. And then we all walk away and we just imagine how can our talents be put to use so that our talents grow? That's not the point. Well, what's the point? And I want to finish by looking at verses 19 through 30. This is how Jesus finishes the parable. And it's interesting that Jesus finishes the parable with a will of the owner. The owner is front and center of this parable. And so we ask, what's the big picture? What's not the point? Now we ask, what's at stake? Because what's at stake is not your ability to multiply, to turn a little into a lot. And it's not what's at stake. What's at stake is the will of the owner. You see, don't you, in verse 19, now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. What's at stake is whatever happens after 19. I want you to just think about what I'm after here. You see, if we finish the parable at verse 18, what we're saying is that every person is accountable to themselves. The owner kind of sets you at work like spinning a top and walks away. And while the owner's gone, just do what you can to multiply. And because that's not the point, we begin to ask, what's the point? Well, the point is that we are actually accountable to someone else. Each of us. This is not just for those who profess faith in Jesus. Those who don't profess faith in Jesus can remain unaffiliated. That's not true. Every human being is accountable to the owner. Wouldn't the absence of accountability be a wonderful thing? I mean, it would be fantastic, wouldn't it? If I would never be held accountable for anything at all, I could constantly adjust my expectations. Like those targets that I don't make, I would say, well, I wasn't really aiming for them after all. That's great. I mean, you have like an eject button all the time. If I'm accountable to no one, when I didn't meet a target, well, I could just make a new target. Or I could lie to myself and I could say, well, I made that target, well enough, and I just make a new target. It would be great. No accountability. I just live my life. But there are some of you who are here this morning and say, Pastor, you're wrong. And you're wrong for this reason. I feel like I am completely unaccountable. I have no relationship with Jesus Christ. I remain independent from any kind of faith tradition. I'm my own person. And I hate my life. That person might say, to be not accountable is awful. I never know how to measure myself. I never know if I've succeeded or not. And when I succeed, I feel like I haven't succeeded and it all was just me posing. I never know if I'm making the right targets. I never know if I've reached the right target. I'm accountable to no one, and I terrify even myself. I'm unsure if, because I'm accountable to no one, I'm unsure if I'm worth being known or loved at all. Boy, if we were just accountable to ourselves, wouldn't it be great? It's bittersweet at best. And praise be to God that there's not a human on this planet that is left completely and entirely, unaccountable. Every human being is accounted for by the owner. The owner knows you. The owner has a will for your life. And this has nothing to do with how you think of yourself as being independent and unaffiliated. Verse 19 says that after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. How beautiful it would be to be settled. No nagging conscience. Things are settled. And do you notice, by the way, how in verse 20, the language, it just gets elevated. It's almost as if the owner comes and there's like a little preacher inside the owner, and the eloquence is beautiful. Verse 20, the servants, they come forward. Do you notice that? It's almost like it's this special appointment. And all of the servants, they call him master. To his face. First time we've heard that. And they say, you have delivered to me this, and I have made this more. It's an elevated scene. And the disciples, hearing the parable, they would immediately get still and they would lean forward in their chairs. They would immediately connect this with the second coming. There's going to be a time when Jesus comes and there will be a face-to-face interaction. He will come and he will settle me. And when I'm settled, then then I really will be settled. You see, the disciples they're already seeing that in this meeting, verse 20, this is what's going to happen in the second coming. With that, would you just contemplate verses 21 and 23? They're the same. The master says to the first servant and to the second servant, just listen to this commendation. In verses 14 and 15, it seemed like an employer was speaking to the servants. And here, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. This is not how an employer speaks. This master is a master indeed, and he's returned, and he will make accounts. But do you notice how affectionate he is? Well done. Wouldn't we like to hear that from a master like this? And isn't it so rare? Does anyone in this room feel as though they hear enough affirmations? Oh, it's so rare. Everyone would agree, I need more affirmation. This master says, well done. And it's interesting that he calls them not just good. Good seems judicial. You've satisfied my expectations. He says not just good, but faithful. In the Greek, faithful is always a relational word. They've not just doubled the money and therefore they're good. They've done so with faithfulness. They've trusted the master, and the master knows that they've trusted him. It is sly, don't you think, that he calls what they've received a little. Do you see that? 21, 23. Do you see that expression, a little? To which of us is 2.5 million a little? To which of us is, 6 million a little? But to this master, it's a little. That's all. It's a little. And you see, if you understand that his wealth is far more than you imagine, because that to him is such a little. What do you think it means when this master says, I will set you over much? What has been placed in their hands is beyond imagination. That he would call it little is beyond their imagination. But he says, I will set you over much. You know what he's saying, don't you? You haven't seen anything yet. There's more. It's almost like he's saying, I have other properties and more wealth. And in our minds, we're just thinking, what could be more than this? When Jesus comes, we'll see there's more. And finally, can you imagine the master in these 2 verses saying to these 2 servants, enter into the joy of your master. You know, the great property that these servants they get to manage, and it is a great property, it must be a great property, and it requires a lot of work, but they actually get to live on that property. That's their home. And then they're stewards of that which the owner has, and so they're tending to, caring for. But the owner has provided their home, but it's not the best home that they have. The best home that they will one day have is a home that is called the joy of the master. That's their home. Their greatest home is to dwell in for all eternity the happiness of the master. How strange it is that the master would say, enter my joy. Can I share with you the things that are not a part of the response of this master to these 2 servants? You know, the master coming back to these 2 servants to settle accounts, do you notice that there's no ranking of the master? The master, he doesn't issue one servant an A+ and the next servant an A-. Do you notice that? It's not there at all. Do you also notice that the master doesn't reference the kind of work that they've done at all, not even remotely? Maybe they did different kinds of work. Maybe one was especially entrepreneurial or creative. The master doesn't care. There's no reference to ranking. There's no reference to the kind of work. There's no reference to how quickly the multiplication of funds happened. There's no reference to the efficiency. None of that. To the master, everything is about a relationship. Everything is about their entering his joy. Now, the third servant is different. And I find it very awkward as a reader of this parable. Obviously, I've read this parable numerous times. I still find it awkward that the most amount of material is for this servant. I mean, look, this servant speaks for 2 verses, 24 and 25. And you see what this servant says. The others didn't. This servant says that you are a hard man. Literally, you are a harsh man. And he says, you reap where you do not sow, you gather where you scatter no seed. But it's not a measure of the master's greatness. It's a measure of how the master is a frustration to the servant. You have impossible expectations. You're harsh. You're difficult. You're impossible. And I was afraid. You see how the servant admits that I was afraid. From day one, I was afraid of you. All of my work, the work of apparently digging a hole, I did all of this out of fear. That's what the servant is saying. It's the opposite of a happy, joyful relationship. It's the opposite of faith. Can you imagine what kind of person this might be? His words, they're not entirely sincere, are they? This is a person that acknowledges the master, that likes having a living from what the master has provided in his property. And this servant is very happy to take the master's money, 1.2 million. But he turns the master into an ogre, a creature, some kind of malevolent tyrant. He doesn't care for the master. There's no faith. There's no relationship. There's just fear. There's 3 servants in this parable, but really, if you step back, there's just 2 responses to Jesus that he wants his disciples to understand. That one kind of servant is a servant who is a disciple that trusts the master and lives his or her life in that trust. And then one kind of a servant is a disciple who says that he or she trusts the master, but does not live that life in that trust, and ultimately proves to be no disciple at all. That's our poser. That's the person who's counterfeit. For them, the master is great and dangerous, at least in their own words, but they're happy to live their life ignoring the master. In fact, they have buried the master. Do you wonder why the word buried and ground is so explicit in this passage? This servant has buried the master. What do we think is about to happen to Jesus? He'll be placed in a tomb by these very kinds of people. Now, why do you think that Jesus finishes his parable with this person? Jesus' preaching, it's so unusual. Here, towards the end of his sermon, he finishes his parable with 26 through 30, which really it's all about judgment. And one wonders then if Jesus is indicting here the religious leaders. Hasn't he just judged the religious leaders? Hasn't he just judged the population of Jerusalem? Hasn't he just judged the temple? It will all be taken apart. Hasn't he just judged the entire structure of Judaism? It could be that Jesus here in the indictment of this third servant is really indicting Judaism. It could also be that Jesus is indicting Judas Iscariot. You know, Judas is still one of the disciples at this point. Maybe Jesus is indicting Judas. But here we are, and we're asking at the close of Jesus' parable, we're asking what is at stake. And I'm not convinced that here Jesus is indicting the religious leaders or that he's indicting Judas Iscariot. I wonder if Jesus is providing a warning for the disciples and a warning for us. This is where I'd like to conclude. You see, A disciple lives their whole life for the sake of Jesus. And in this third servant, we're given a picture of a risk of our own lives as Christians. There's two warnings here that are for all those who profess faith in Jesus. One of those warnings has to do with remembering what we have received, and another of those warnings has to do with using all that we've received for Jesus. Can I say that again? This is a warning for us as Christians to understand what we have received and to use all that we have received for Jesus. I'll say just a few things and then I'll close. Understanding what we have received. You see, the parable is about distribution of money, use of money. But the distribution part, while it was understood most certainly by the disciples, surely they are even now beginning to understand that it's more than just money. But if we jump forward to the ministry of the disciples after the ascension of Jesus into heaven, we go to places like 1 Peter 4, where Peter, he tells the church that every Christian is a recipient of God's varied grace. 1 Peter 4:10. You see, Peter is saying that every Christian has received a portion of God's grace, varied grace. Peter, he says it this way. He says, as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. And then Peter goes on to talk about those who have received God's varied grace in the form of a speaking, teaching ministry, or those who have received God's varied grace in the form of a serving ministry. Isn't that interesting? Peter, probably not now as he hears this parable for the first time, is at this place, but he comes to see that what Jesus was talking about is that Jesus has equipped the church. He knows us individually. And it is not true for a Christian to say, I'm one of those Christians who have not received God's varied grace to be used in the life of the church. I'm not that person. And Peter says, yes, you are that person. Every Christian is like these servants. You're well equipped, sufficiently equipped to do that which the Master has for you to do. And we need to remember that. We certainly need to remember that individually. But when you look at passages like Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, we actually understand that every person in the church is an important member, and a member of a body, whether an eye or an ear or hands or feet, has received that ability from God's varied grace. Every Christian has received God's varied grace. And as a church body, we need to be the kind of church that's helping one another to believe that they have received grace to be used in the life of the church, to believe that, but to also know what it is. What is the varied grace that I have received? You know, church, that we actually become aware of that in community. We don't go off to our studies and we take personality tests. And we read passages about the variety of gifts, and we walk out of our study knowing exactly what my varied graces are. We actually do that in community. We have brothers and sisters who are seeing things in our lives. Can I encourage you right now? Speak as you see those things in a brother or sister's life. Just as affirmation is very difficult to receive, so too is hearing how my brother and sister sees me gifted by God. Share with those whom you see who have gifts to serve and to care for and to cry and to organize and to speak and to simply be available. Be quick to say thank you for a sundry of abilities that your brothers and sisters have in the life of the church. They need that help. All of us are sufficiently equipped, like all three of the servants, And we need to believe that, but we also need to know what that is. Let's speak to one another. You know, I'm saying to you, affirm and praise liberally. Affirm and praise liberally. So the parable is a warning in that regard to understand what you have received. And then the second warning is to use all that we have received for Jesus. You know, it's always the business leaders, the wealth managers who talk like this, who say that I am a Christian and I have lots of money, and so I feel like I need to use that money for philanthropic Christian things. And that's great. But we hear business people talking that way, but all of us should talk that way. We should we should listen to our brothers and sisters who say that we have these gifts, and we should happily use our gifts for the common good. It's not just for business leaders with great wealth. You don't have to know the Bible very well to know that very inconsequential things are important. Sitting next to someone and mourning with them, that's important in the Bible. Making someone feel that they are more significant than you, that's in the Bible. These inconsequential things, words of encouragement, sharing the things that you have, affirmation, your presence with individuals, your not only willingness to pray, but following through in praying for others, serving in simple acts. You see, a disciple lives their whole lives for the sake of Jesus. And we need to hear this warning of the third servant to not only not be that third servant, but to be reminded that we have received what we need and that everything, even things that seem small and insignificant, are useful to this owner because a disciple lives their whole life for the sake of Jesus. Would you join me in prayer?